So today we are going to look at our first grade unit, patterns and skip counting. We have three TEKs that we're going to talk about. First is 1.5a, where students are expected to recite forward and backward starting with any number between 100 and 120. Then we'll look at 1.5b, where students skip count by 2s, 5s, or 10s up to 120 for the purpose of determining the number of objects in a set. And then 1.5c, where we use relationships to find 10 more or 10 less than a given number up to 120. So let's start with 1.5a. So there are a couple of kindergarten TEKs that lead to this. So I want you to take a look at K2a and K5a. So K2a, students do recite forward and backward, but only up to 20. And they can do it with objects or without objects. So that's what their starting point is for this unit. Now, they also, in K5a, they count or recite numbers up to 100, beginning with any number. That part, beginning with any number. That standard is only counting forward. So if I said to a kindergarten student, please start at 50 and start counting, I could expect them to count up to 100. I don't expect them to count backward from 50. If I'm asking them to count backward, I only expect them to go from 20 down. So forward and backward, which is similar to your TEK, they only go up to 20. And in kindergarten, they were able to use objects, or they learned to do that without objects. So both of these support your 1.5a. This is a great opportunity for you to count up and count down as you expect students to clean up and transition to another activity, or get lined up by the time I count from this number to this number, and you count forward and backward. So those are good activities for choral counting, but you have to assess each student's understanding of that individually. That's not something that can be assessed paper pencil. It's not something that can be assessed in a group activity. If I'm going to really understand where my students are with this TEK, that's something I have to assess on an individual basis to see, can each student recite forward and backward with any number that I give them up to 120. That doesn't mean I start them at 120 and expect them to count higher. Kids in first grade do not have to count above 120. So if I start at 120, I can only expect them to count backward. Okay, so take a look at these two kindergarten TEKs for this one. This is something you'll embed in class all day, every day. We're looking at page numbers and counting forward and counting backward when we're in ELA. Maybe we're working with some rocks in science, and we want them to count them. Count forward, count backward. So we're using our counting skills all the time. Then we are going to move to our skip counting TEK. Now, in kindergarten, your K5a that was here, students also used that standard to learn to recite their numbers by 1s and 10s. So that K5a, once they were fine here by 1s, did bring in counting by 10s, still up to 100 and still forward counting. We're not skip counting backwards in kinder or first grade. So K5a did count by 1s and 10s. Now, this was an expectation of reciting, so this was choral. So choral counting or individual counting. It was not used in the same way we use this standard in first grade. In first grade, the whole point of this standard is to determine the objects in a set. Now, why do we do that? Well, we do that for efficiency purposes. So if I asked students to count how many buttons I have here, they're going to start by counting by 1s, 1, 2, 3, but you and I would not count by 1s. We would find an efficient way to group them. Maybe I would count by 2s, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, but that's not even as efficient as it could be I could group them by fives. Here's 5, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now I'm at 10. Now I'm at 15, 20, 25, 28. So we count to determine number of objects in a set. Does that mean we'll never choral count with our kids in first grade when we're skip counting? No, that's not what it means. But this standard requires that they use that skill to determine the number of objects in a set. So what's the point of that? Why do they need to do that? Well, because I need them to move from just counting objects in a set to what we are about to start after this, which is counting money. You and I don't sit here and count this as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We know this is worth 10, so we say 10, 20, then I say 25, 30, 35, 40, 45. I'm counting efficiently. So I learn to do that with objects in a set, and then I transition to being able to count coins by skip counting. 10, 20, 2 of those, that makes 30, 2 of those, that's 40, 45, 46, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I know I have 51 cents. So I'm able to use this skill in our future units for working with money. But I have to understand what those numbers mean initially by counting objects that are one-to-one. I can't move from one-to-one objects to counting things that have a value of 5 and 10 if I don't understand this first. So we start by skip counting individual objects that are one-to-one correspondence so that when we get to money, we can count things that have a value besides 1. So that's how we get there. Now, we're going to move these out of the way. And the last one that we're going to talk about is 15C, which is our relationships to find 10 more or 10 less than a given number up to 120. So what did they do with this in kindergarten? Well, in K2F, they did 1 more or 1 less, but they only went up to 20. So you can see that, oh, you can't see that, up to 20. You can see that's a big step from what they did in kindergarten to what we're expecting students to do in first grade. So there's several things that we do with this. We use a hundreds chart so they see the patterns in our numbers. If I'm adding 10, I'm moving down the hundreds chart, it gets 10 more. I just go straight down a column. If I look at the column that has 12, then the next would be 22, the next would be 32, so I can see I'm counting by tens. If I move across a row, I'm counting by ones. That makes sense? But notice this is more or less. So I might start a student at 87 and say, what's 10 less? Well, if I'm using a hundreds chart, 10 less, I would go up and I would see 77. 10 less, I would go up and I would see 67. So how can we do this activity? Well, we looked at one activity together at the C&P, or sorry, Curriculum Connections, where we use Uno cards. And the way students play this is they have a deck of Uno cards that just has the number cards, not the draw twos and skips and wilds and all of reverse and all those things. We just use the number cards. So they would draw 2 cards out of the deck, and let's say these are the 2 cards that I drew. They put them face up, so they've built their number where it says Uno. Then I look right here. What is 1 less than 80? So I would laminate these, or you can print them on letter paper size so you put them in a sheet protector. So I would want students to be able to tell me 79 is 1 less than 80. 81 is 1 more than 80. And we do it like this because it correlates to the hundreds chart. If I look at 80 on a hundreds chart, 1 less is 79. That's right beside it. 1 more is 81. That's right beside it. What is 10 less than 80? Well, 70 is. 90 is 10 more than 80. And this correlates to the hundreds chart. As I move up and down a column, I'm counting by tens. So you see how all these standards fit together to be able to do that. Now, you can practice these standards with lots of different things that you have in your classroom. You could have students roll 2 dice and say, here's my starting number is 21. Recite, keep going, count up from 21 until I tell you to stop. Count backwards from 21 until I tell you to stop. Roll 2 dice, it's 22. Tell me what's 10 more than 22 or 10 less than 22. I could do the same thing with a deck of cards similar to the Uno cards. I could flip 2 cards over and maybe I have a 9 and a 4. Starting at 94, count forward for me until I tell you to stop. Starting at 94, count backward for me until I tell you to stop. Look at 94. What's 10 more than 94? That's going to be a tough one for kids because we crossed that century mark with 94. Now I need them to know it goes to 104. So we need to have those supports, like maybe you consider instead of just a hundreds chart, maybe we need a 120 chart to support that movement across the century. That's a tough skill for kids as they're learning this. So having that support to move across the century would help them with that understanding. So we can use decks of cards, we can use dice that we can roll. There's all sorts of tools that you have in your classroom that will make this standard or these 3 standards for this unit hands-on activities. But these are things that we have to listen to our kids to be able to assess them well, so that we understand what each student is able to do and where their point of struggle is. So please let me know if you have any questions about this unit or anything I can do to help you out. Have a great day.